Grief doesn't just weigh on your heart, it strips away the masks people wear. I learned that the hard way. My name is Kobe, and for 16 years, I believed I knew my wife's family. I thought I understood their values, their loyalty, and the love they supposedly had for Vivian. But it wasn't until she passed away that I realized I had been living in a carefully constructed illusion. Vivian was only 44 when she lost her battle with a lifelong autoimmune disease. She had fought with strength and grace since she was a child. And I had walked that path beside her since the day we met. 16 years of marriage meant hospital visits, experimental treatments, and nights where I held her hand when she was too weak to stand. But it also meant vacations when her health allowed, evenings filled with laughter, and a home built on love, not on fear. When she died, my world collapsed. The house we had built together suddenly echoed with silence. No soft humming from her studio. No playful arguments over who would do the dishes. No late-night talks about dreams we both knew we'd never fully reach. I thought my grief would be the hardest battle I had to fight. But I was wrong. 2 months later, I sat in a mahogany-paneled law office, waiting for the attorney to read her will. I expected sadness, maybe even some tension. It's never easy to divide an estate. But what I didn't expect was how her parents and brothers would treat her death not as a moment of loss, but as a business opportunity. The attorney's voice was calm, steady, and professional as he read through Vivian's wishes. She had left me the majority of her estate, our house, her business assets, and her investments. It was what we had both agreed upon in countless conversations during her final months. She wanted to make sure I would be secure, knowing I had given up career opportunities to care for her. It was her way of protecting me after she was gone. But as the words left the lawyer's mouth, I could see the transformation happen on the faces of her parents. Their eyes darkened, their lips tightened, and before long, their grief was drowned by outrage. Her mother's voice cut through the air like a knife. That money belongs to her brothers. Blood should stay with blood. Her father's jaw clenched as he nodded in agreement, his face turning red. In that moment, it hit me with brutal clarity. Grief hadn't softened them, it had sharpened their greed. I sat there stunned, staring at the people who had barely visited Vivian in her final years. People who couldn't be bothered to ask about her treatments, her pain, or the reality of her illness. And yet, here they were, fighting over what she left behind as though her life had been nothing more than a vault waiting to be opened. That was the moment I realized. Sometimes family doesn't show its true face until there's money on the table. When I think back on my life with Vivian, I don't see sickness first, I see love. Yes, her autoimmune illness was always there, like a shadow we could never escape. But it didn't define her spirit or our marriage. From the very beginning, she had been upfront with me. On our third date, she sat across the table at a small Italian restaurant in Denver and said, "Kobe, you need to know this. I've been sick since I was a child. If you're going to stay with me, it won't be easy." I remember reaching across the table, taking her hand, and replying, "I'm not afraid of hard. I'm afraid of missing out on you." That was the beginning of 16 years together, years of joy, sacrifice, and lessons I'll carry forever. We made the difficult choice not to have children, not because we didn't want them, but because pregnancy would have been dangerous for Vivian. Instead, we filled our lives in other ways. We traveled when her health allowed, New Orleans in the spring, Boston in the fall, and one unforgettable road trip across Route 66. When travel wasn't possible, we created adventures at home, hosting dinner parties, building a backyard garden, and binge-watching documentaries late into the night. Vivian was a talented graphic designer. She freelanced for major companies, balancing her career around medical appointments and treatment schedules. I used to joke that her laptop was her paintbrush, and the world was her canvas. She had a way of creating beauty even when her body was failing her. But while I admired her strength every day, I also saw what her parents chose not to see. To them, her illness was not a challenge, It was an inconvenience. During family holidays, conversations revolved around her brothers, their promotions, their kids, their new houses. Vivian would sit quietly, smiling politely, even when no one asked how she was holding up. There was one Thanksgiving that still burns in my memory. Vivian had just returned from a 2-week hospital stay. She was pale, weak, and struggling to eat. I made her a plate of mashed potatoes, thinking something soft might help. Her mother glanced at her across the table and said, almost dismissively, "Vivian, you really should try harder to keep up your energy. Everyone else is managing just fine." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Vivian just gave me a small smile, as if to say, "Don't make a scene. It's not worth it." That was who she was, always choosing peace over conflict, even when she deserved so much better. Despite their indifference, Vivian never cut them out of her life. She remembered birthdays, sent holiday cards, and even invited them to Christmas dinner every year. She believed that family ties, however flawed, were still worth preserving. But as her condition worsened, their visits became less frequent. By the last 2 years of her life, they barely came at all. During those years, I became not just her husband, but her caretaker, her advocate, her shield. I managed medications, insurance calls, and late-night emergency room visits. There were nights I slept sitting upright in a hospital chair, holding her hand, because that was the only way she could fall asleep. I don't regret a single moment, but I'd be lying if I said it wasn't lonely sometimes. Lonely not because of Vivian, but because of the silence from the very people who should have been standing beside us. Her parents seemed to think that once she married me, she became my responsibility, not theirs. Looking back now, I realized that Vivian understood all of this far better than I did. She knew her parents' limitations. She knew their love came with conditions. And maybe that's why, when it came time to plan her will, she didn't hesitate. She wanted her legacy to go where her love truly lived, not where obligation demanded it. 2 months after Vivian's funeral, I found myself walking into a law office in downtown Denver. The heavy oak doors, the polished floors, and the quiet ticking of a clock on the wall made the room feel colder than it should have. It wasn't grief that chilled me that day. It was the anticipation of what was about to unfold. Her parents, Patricia and Kenneth, were already there, sitting stiffly in their seats. Her 2 brothers leaned against the wall, arms crossed, their expressions unreadable. I took a seat at the long mahogany table, my heart heavy but steady. I knew what Vivian wanted. We had spoken about it countless times in hushed conversations late at night when the illness kept her awake. She wanted me to be secure. She wanted me to carry on without fear. The attorney, a middle-aged man with silver hair and a calm voice, began reading the will. At first, it was standard legal language, her full name, confirmation of her sound mind, and acknowledgement of the document's legality. But then came the specifics. Vivian had left me our home, her business accounts, and the investments we had built together. She had also left me the stocks she'd received from freelance contracts with major companies. It wasn't a surprise to me, but it was to them. I watched as Patricia's polite mask cracked, her lips tightening with every sentence. Kenneth shifted uncomfortably, his jaw clenching. By the time the attorney finished outlining the main provisions, the silence in the room was deafening. Then Patricia broke it. Her voice was sharp, almost venomous. "This isn't right. That money belongs to her brothers. Blood is blood. He's not one of us." I sat frozen for a second, stunned by the sheer audacity of it. After everything, after years of absence, years of silence, years of treating Vivian like a burden, they wanted to strip her of her last choice. Her final say. The attorney cleared his throat and reminded them gently that the will reflected Vivian's wishes and was legally binding. But his words only fueled their anger. Kenneth leaned forward, his voice low but full of disdain. Family money should stay with family, not go to someone outside the bloodline. I wanted to shout, to remind them that I was the one who had held Vivian's hand through every surgery. Every round of chemo-like treatments. Every emergency room visit at 2 a.m. Where had they been? Too busy? Too uncomfortable? Too indifferent? But I didn't shout. I just sat there, staring at them, realizing that this wasn't grief talking. This was greed. The attorney then reached for a second envelope. He explained that Vivian had also prepared specific bequests for her parents and brothers. Inside were small but thoughtful gifts, a few $1,000s each. Family photographs, keepsakes from their grandmother. It was her way of acknowledging them, even though they hadn't been present. But instead of gratitude, the room erupted. Her brothers muttered under their breath about being cheated. Patricia scoffed, waving her hand dismissively as though the keepsakes were worthless trinkets. Kenneth glared at me as if I had stolen something from him personally. That was the moment I knew. This wasn't going to end here. They weren't going to accept Vivian's choices. They were going to fight. And they were going to drag me through hell to do it. It didn't take long. Just a few weeks after the will reading, a thick envelope arrived at my doorstep. Inside were legal papers. Vivian's parents were suing me. Their claim? That I had manipulated Vivian during her illness, using her vulnerability to influence her estate planning. When I read those words, my chest tightened as if I had been punched. It wasn't enough that I had lost my wife. Now I had to defend the integrity of our marriage against people who had barely been present in her life. I hired the best estate litigation attorney in Denver. His name was Richard, a sharp and relentless lawyer with decades of experience. From the moment I sat in his office, he assured me, "Kobe, they'll need solid evidence to prove undue influence. From what you've told me, they don't have it." The lawsuit dragged on for months. There were depositions, interrogatories, and endless document requests. Their attorney tried to paint me as controlling, suggesting that because I handled the finances and medical decisions, I must have pressured Vivian. But the truth was simple. Vivian had always been clear-minded. Even in her final months, she was the kind of woman who insisted on double-checking every document, every investment, every treatment plan. One of the hardest days came during my own deposition. Their lawyer leaned across the table and asked coldly, "Mr. Davis, isn't it true that you stood to gain financially from your wife's passing?" I stared at him, biting down on the anger boiling inside me. I stood to lose everything that mattered. The money doesn't bring her back. And if you had ever met Vivian, you'd know she couldn't be manipulated. Not by anyone, not even me. There were moments in that courtroom that cut deep. Patricia testified that I had isolated Vivian, claiming I discouraged her from visiting family. Kenneth claimed that I managed her emails and phone calls to keep her dependent on me. Both statements were lies, but hearing them out loud felt like salt rubbed into an open wound. And then came the witnesses who reminded me why I was fighting. Vivian's best friend, Marissa, testified. Vivian told me many times that Kobe was her rock. She said she wanted him to have everything because he had already given her more than she could ever repay. Another witness, her former doctor, confirmed that Vivian had full mental capacity when she finalized her will. His words were clear. She was weak physically, yes, but mentally, sharp as ever. Slowly, their case began to unravel. Under oath, Patricia admitted she hadn't seen Vivian more than twice in the last year of her life. Kenneth struggled to explain why he hadn't attended even one of her hospital stays. Their absence became impossible to ignore. After months of hearings, the day of the verdict finally came. The judge listened carefully, then delivered his ruling. The will was valid, and the claims of undue influence were unfounded. Not only was Vivian's voice upheld, but her parents were ordered to pay my legal fees for bringing a frivolous case. As the gavel struck, I felt a mix of exhaustion and vindication. This wasn't about money, it never had been. It was about defending Vivian's truth, even when she was no longer here to speak it. When the judge delivered his ruling, I felt like the weight of the world had lifted from my chest. Vivian's will was upheld, her voice, her decisions, her final wishes, all validated in the eyes of the law. But what came next was the part her parents never saw coming. Because their lawsuit was deemed frivolous, the court ordered Patricia and Kenneth to pay my legal fees. And Richard, my attorney, was not cheap. Months of depositions, filings, and hearings had racked up bills that stretched into six figures. When the total was read out loud, I watched their faces fall. The shock in their eyes told me they had never considered the cost of their greed. They had hoped to take from me. Instead, they lost what little Vivian had left them and were now buried under debts far greater. The irony was brutal. Vivian had been generous, leaving them thoughtful keepsakes and a modest sum. If they had accepted it with grace, they could have left with their dignity intact. But by choosing greed, they lost everything, including their reputation. I remember walking out of the courthouse that day. The sun was shining on the steps of the Denver County Courthouse. But for me it wasn't triumph I felt, it was closure. I hadn't just defended an estate. I had defended Vivian's honor, her memory, her right to decide what happened to what she built. That mattered more than any dollar amount. In the weeks that followed, I heard whispers from extended family. Some of Vivian's cousins called me, apologizing for Patricia and Kenneth's behavior. One even told me, "Vivian was right to leave it all to you. They never showed up when it counted." Those words were like a quiet confirmation of everything Vivian had understood long before I did. Her parents never spoke to me again after the trial. I suppose that was their choice. But truthfully, it was a relief. By the end, it was clear they hadn't been grieving their daughter. They had been grieving the inheritance they thought they deserved. And that is not grief I could ever respect. Tieng viet. Phu de kiem sot. Ki tham fan tuyanin. Toi ko cam jok nu gan nong tren nuk min duok niok bo. Di chuk kua Vivian duok giu nguyen. Tieng noi, quay din, ba mong nuon kuoi kung kuako, all da duok luet fap zak nyan. Nung du zay rasao du moi la du cha mi ko chua tung go toi. Vi vu keen by coi la vo nia, toa buok Patricia va Kenneth phi tra phi luet su cho toi. Va Richard, luet su kua toi, kong he ri, hang thang troi voi loi kai, ho so. Ba kak phien du tran da dao nen wa don len den con so sao chu so. Ki tong sa duok dak ra. Toi nin thay guang mat ho sup zong. Kai nin sung sat trong mat ho cho thay ho chua bao giogi din kai jia kua long tham. Ho hai vong lay duok tu toi. Thay bao du. Ho mat ka fan it oi Vivian da de lai ba con gan them kon no lon hun nu. Su mia mai that tan nyan. Vivian da rong luong. De lai cho ho nung ki bat y nia va mo sa tien kim tun. Noi ho chap nyan voi su be it on. Ho da ko the ra di voi fam jian win vin. Nung vi chan long tham. Ho mat tat ka. Including ka dan du. Toi ban no buok ra koi toa home du. Nung chu trin back them toa in quan Denver. Nung trong toi kong phi cam jok chien thang, mala su cape lai. Toi kong kai bao bei mo koi tai san. Toi da bao bei dan du. Ki yuk, ba kien quay din kua Vivian voi nung gi ko da gay dung. Du quan trong hun bat ki con sa now. Trong nung tuan sao du. Toi nghe nung loi ti tham tu ho hang. Mo vi noyan im ho kua Vivian da goicho toi. Chin loi vi han dong kua Patricia va Kenneth. Ko noi ka noi. Vivian dung ki de lai tat ka cho an. Ho chua bao gio ko mat ki kan. Nung loi du nu mo su zak nyan yin lang cho moi du Vivian da hu tu lao. Truok ka toi. Cha mi ko kong bao gio noi choyan voi toi nua sao fien toa. Kola du la lua chan kua ho. Nung that long. Du la mo su ni num. Kuoi kung. Ro rang ho kong do buon bi mat con gai. Ho chi do buon bi mat kong thua ke ma ho gi min zung dang. Ba du com phi la noi buon ma toi ko the tun trong. In the quiet that followed the court battle, I finally had time to grieve properly. For months, I had been consumed by legal documents, hearings, and the constant sting of betrayal. When the noise faded, what remained was the empty chair at the dining table, the faint scent of her favorite perfume in the closet, and the memories of a life we had built together. I realized then that the real inheritance Vivian left me wasn't money, property, or investments. It was the love we shared, the lessons we learned, and the strength we built through years of facing her illness together. That was something no court could grant and no lawsuit could take away. But there was another truth, one that I learned the hard way. Grief has a way of showing people's true colors. Vivian's parents revealed theirs when they tried to turn her death into a transaction. Their love had conditions, tied to what they thought they could gain. In the end, they lost everything, not because the court punished them, but because their greed consumed them. I've thought a lot about what Vivian understood long before I did. She knew who truly stood by her side. She knew that family isn't just defined by blood, it's defined by loyalty, sacrifice, and presence. She had chosen her legacy carefully, and the court only confirmed what her heart already knew. Today, when people ask me about that chapter of my life, I tell them this: money reveals, but it never heals. It can expose greed, entitlement, and selfishness, but it cannot mend the wound of losing someone you love. True healing comes from remembering who they were, honoring their choices, and carrying their spirit forward. Vivian faced every day of her life with courage and grace. That is the inheritance I treasure most. And if there's one lesson I can pass on from this painful journey, it's this: love people while they're alive, not just when there's something to gain after they're gone. Because in the end, money fades, but love, that endures. The greatest inheritance we can leave behind is not money, property, or investments, it's love, loyalty, and presence. Vivian's parents lost everything because they allowed greed to overshadow compassion. They cared more about what they could gain after her death than about being there for her while she lived. Kobe's story reminds us that true family is not just defined by blood but by the sacrifices, support, and loyalty we show when it matters most. Grief has a way of revealing people's true character. Some rise with love, others sink with selfishness. The lesson is clear: love people while they're alive, honor their choices after they're gone, and never let greed blind you to what really matters. Money fades, but love and loyalty endure forever.